Today is Saturday, June 1st. For the first time in American history, a former U.S. president has been convicted of a crime. Today, we're going inside the courtroom where it all played out. A reporter who was there will describe how the jury acted throughout the trial, as well as former President Trump's reaction to hearing guilty 34 times. Then later, an expert on democracy and elections will answer some common questions about what happens next. Can Trump still run for president? Can he vote? Could he be sent to prison while president? But first, we start with CBS News investigative reporter Graham Cates, who watched this case unfold from inside the courtroom. I spoke with him shortly after the verdict was announced on Thursday. Welcome to the Newsworthy Special Edition Saturday, when we sit down with a different expert or celebrity every Saturday to talk about something in the news. Don't forget to tune in every Monday through Friday for our regular episodes, when we provide all the day's news in just 10 minutes. It's fast, fair, fun, and on the go. I'm Erica Mandy. It's time for today's Special Edition Saturday. You ready? Let's do this. Graham Cates, thank you so much for joining us here on the Newsworthy.
Thank you.
As those guilty verdicts were read off, what was the reaction inside the courtroom and from Trump himself?
As the foreperson was saying to each count, guilty, 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 Trump continued to really just stare straight ahead. He didn't move his face in any direction. He was a little bit slumped in his chair. Throughout the last couple of days, as the jury has gone in and out of the room, he has stared at them. And none of them had met his gaze back, really. When they came in for the verdict this time, he didn't look at them. He continued to, and he was standing because he had to, they were walking in, but he continued to look straight ahead. And none of them walking in either or leaving after the verdict was read looked at him either. And then it was time for Trump to leave. And he turned and very, very quickly, as he started to walk down the aisle, grabbed Eric Trump's hand. It was kind of a gesture, like a moment of support, but then let go and walked out of the courtroom with as deep of a frown, I think, as I've personally ever seen on Trump's face. It was a genuine face of upset.
And obviously this case was not televised. So what was the feeling throughout the whole trial, even before the verdict was read? Because you were there day in and day out.
When there was a witness on the stand like Stormy Daniels or Michael Cohen, everyone in the room was more animated in a way that you don't typically see during a criminal trial. And that includes the lawyers who were gesturing and yelling and really putting on a show. And that was partly because those were really important witnesses to the case. So if you're going to kind of go all out, that's the time to do it. But then, there were 22 witnesses, and a lot of them were entering evidence about cell phone data and the internal account keeping practices of the Trump organization. And on those days, it was quiet. It was very serious. Trump paid close attention when the person was anyone who was one of his former employees or staff. And to be fair, every one of them, of course, except for Michael Cohen, expressed great admiration for him. Two of his former staff cried on the stand. In the case of Hope Hicks, it was right after she had said something that was, I think she understood to be kind of particularly incriminating about him. And it was about a minute later that she just kind of started crying. The atmosphere and the way that that Trump behaved and the way that the lawyers behaved really varied day to day and witness to witness.
Were you and other reporters expecting it to take a while with the jury? Or, I know there's no way to know, but what was the expectation as you guys waited?
Oh, other people may have had guesses and things like that, but I really mean this. I try never to make predictions about stuff like this. It's 12 people who I've never met before. It was very clear throughout this trial that they were paying extraordinarily close attention. They took a lot of notes. I heard a court reporter refer to them as a professional jury. They were always on time. Not once did we see, even including the alternates, did anyone ever catch anyone dozing off. They always, day in and day out, the whole group would follow, they turn to the person asking the question, the lawyer asking the question, and then as soon as the lawyer stopped there, you'd see all of their heads turn to the witness on the stand and then back to the lawyer. You couldn't find a group of people paying closer attention.
Let's go back and get really clear for the audience. of the charges against Trump? Because, this is often referred to as like the hush money case, but describe what really the jury found him guilty of.
Sure. At a base, it was 34 felony counts of falsifying business records. Now, the second part of that, making that the records were falsified, but that would just be a misdemeanor. And the way it becomes a felony is when you do it with the intent to commit another crime. And why else would you falsify records, right? That's why it's almost always a felony. And in this case, the other crime was conspiracy to promote or prevent the election of a candidate. And what the judge instructed the jurors was that they could consider many factors to conclude that Trump had that intent, that beyond that he agreed to the scheme to falsify the records, that he also intended to promote himself, right, to be elected in an unlawful way.
So sentencing is now set for July 11th. And the sentence and whether Trump will face any prison time is up to the judge. So I just want to be clear for people, that's up to the judge, not the jury. Describe what a massive decision this judge has ahead of him and what he's going to be weighing in this decision.
He has a first-time felon on a nonviolent charge. So while he could impose a significant prison term, he can also impose probation or house arrest, or he gets wide leeway here. And I don't think he's given any indication that prison is in the cards. He hasn't, of course, hasn't given any indication that it's not, but it's worth noting that during closing arguments, Todd Blanche, Trump's attorney, toward the end of his closing argument, said to the jury something along the lines of, "You can't send this man to prison," on the words of Michael Cohen. And afterwards, the judge really severely admonished Blanche because that was essentially against court rules, because the jury isn't the one that makes that decision, only the judge does. And then the judge instructed the jury that prison isn't some sort of guarantee in this case, and that they're not supposed to consider that while making their decision.
Of course, former President Trump's team is planning to appeal. So coming up next, we're talking about how that will likely delay any consequences Trump may face. And our guest expert helps answer some other common questions about what happens next. Matthew Weil is the executive director of the Bipartisan Policy Center's Democracy Program, where he's responsible for the Elections Project and more. We discuss, can Trump still run for president? Can he vote? Could he pardon himself if reelected? And what happens if either Trump or Biden have to drop out before Election Day? But first, a break for our sponsors. You might remember when I talked about loving my Fits Everybody long sleeve bodysuit from Skims. Well, as the weather gets warmer, I wanted to get a t-shirt version, and Skims did not disappoint. I got the Fits Everybody t-shirt in the onyx color, and it's a wardrobe staple for me now. I reach for it almost every day, and the fit is so perfect because it snatches me right at the waist. It's smooth and soft on my skin, too. Plus, you don't have to worry about washing it. I've washed it a million times already, and it's held its shape, which is so impressive. Also, I used to think t-shirts were only for casual wear, but the fabric is so smooth and flattering that I can really dress it up, too. From cropped silhouettes to long-sleeve layering tees, there is a style for everyone from Skims. Shop the Skims T-Shirt Shop at skims.com. Now available in sizes extra, extra small to 4X. And if you haven't yet, be sure to let them know that I sent you. After you place your order, select podcast in the survey and select my show, The Newsworthy, in the drop-down menu that follows. If you need a deodorant that can actually keep up with you this summer, Lumi deodorant is your answer. As a mom, I love being able to throw on this deodorant, run around with my toddler at the park all day, and not stink if we meet friends for dinner afterward. And for work events, I appreciate that I can shake hands even after a high-pressure meeting or speaking gig, knowing that I still smell great. My Lumi deodorant keeps me confident all day and night. Lumi Whole Body Deodorant is powered by mandelic acid to deliver impressive 72-hour odor control. I'm especially a fan of Lumi Stick Deodorant for the morning, and the deodorant wipes are perfect for on the go. In fact, Lumi's starter pack is perfect for new customers. It comes with a solid stick deodorant, cream tube deodorant, 2 free products of your choice like mini body wash and deodorant wipes, and free shipping. So as a special offer for listeners, new customers can get 15% off all Lumi products with our exclusive code. And if you combine the 15% off with the already discounted starter pack, that equals over 40% off their starter pack. So use code NEWSWORTHY for 15% off your first purchase at LumeDeodorant.com. That's code NEWSWORTHY at Lume, L-U-M-E, deodorant, DEODORANT.com. Now to our conversation with Matthew Weil from the Bipartisan Policy Center. Matthew Weil, thank you so much for joining us here on the Newsworthy.
Thank you for having me.
So obviously this has been a historic trial and now a historic verdict. What was your reaction to it all when you heard guilty on all counts?
I do think it was a big moment in history to have a former president convicted of felonies. And then, of course, the immediacy of it is, what does it mean for the coming election, both politically, but just by the rules of our democracy? Can he run? Can he not run? Is it going to change anything with respect to how the conventions are going to happen? Because his sentencing is going to happen right before the Republican nominating convention. So many questions kind of popped into my head all at once.
Exactly. And so let's get into some of those, starting with, can former President Trump run for president again? And the answer is yes. Can you explain why that is?
It's very clear in our Constitution what the qualifications are to be president. There is an age requirement, there's a residency requirement, and you have to be a natural born citizen. Those are the only qualifications that there are to be president. And that is the easiest question to answer right now, that he absolutely can run. He can absolutely win from behind bars if that's the case that we have a couple of months from now.
But there's been some confusion about whether Trump can vote for himself in November. Can you help clarify that?
Sure. So I'm going to caveat it with that I'm not a lawyer, but I have read on this issue a lot. My understanding is that Florida would have barred him under its own laws, but because the state of New York wouldn't have barred him, he is not barred from voting in Florida.
So Florida's law says if you are convicted out of state, it's based on that state's rules. And New York's rule is that if he doesn't go to prison, then he is allowed to vote. Or if he's completed a prison sentence, is my understanding. Is that right?
Yeah, that is my understanding too. Again, very complicated, and it's very unlikely that, first of all, that he'll be sentenced to jail. I don't think that's going to happen. But even a sentence that was the most severe is unlikely to actually be started before the election. There was going to be probably months to years of appeals, and that would slow down the process anyway.
Could this appeal process go all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court? And how much could this delay Trump facing whatever consequence he's given in July?
I think it's unlikely there's any constitutional implication to any of these questions that were before the trial court. So I think it's unlikely it goes to the Supreme Court, but it could go to the Supreme Court of New York for sure. And just like the Supreme Court of the United States, the New York Supreme Court is very busy and does not operate on a timeline that fits with the political process. So that's why I do think the appeals process and, certainly the former president's attorneys have already made clear they anticipate multiple appeals or multiple avenues of appeal. This could take a long time.
Okay. So if Trump wins re-election, there are a lot of questions for that. What do you think is important to point out for people?
If he is reelected, say, and this case is still moving through the appeals process, typically there's a lot of deference given to sitting presidents about what happens with any kind of legal problems they're having outside of the role of their office. So I think should he win re-election, should he be inaugurated on January 20th, 2025, this case will likely be kind of nothing to him, because it's very unlikely that New York could compel him to do anything at that point if he was president again.
At least until he left office again, and then potentially could have to kind of return to whatever consequences were out there.
Yeah, I think that is right. But again, so far down the line, I think hard to really know how that would play out.
And again, just to kind of point out, this is uncharted territory.
Absolutely. I mean, we don't have a playbook for this at all.
But to be clear, Trump could not pardon himself of this crime because it's a state crime.
That's right. Yeah, the president can only pardon federal crimes. So in this case, he would need whoever is the governor of New York to issue that pardon.
If he were to be reelected, he's still facing 3 other potential trials. How would that be handled?
Well, yeah, so the state cases would likely be delayed, but I do think, and I think it's fairly widely accepted, that any of the federal cases, of which there are 2, the president could effectively end those cases. The president is, ultimately in charge of the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice is ultimately who brings cases, even at the, state level in federal court. And so I think that it's very commonly accepted that should the former president win re-election, he would end those pending cases.
Recent polls show most of Trump supporters are not going to be swayed by this verdict, though some might be. Do you think that this could have an impact on the outcome of the election?
Yeah, I think both the current president, President Biden, and the former president, President Trump, these are very well-known candidates, and almost everyone has an opinion. So I think the polling is likely to stay pretty stable. But because it's so close, I mean, because it doesn't matter necessarily what the national polling shows, but like the 6 or 7 states that might actually determine the election are all close, any little swing could matter.
Beyond legal troubles, what would happen if something happened to either President Biden or former President Trump? Whether they face health issues and have to drop out, or there's something else that happens, who steps in? What could we expect on November if that's the case?
So this summer, both parties are going to nominate formally their candidate. If after they make their nominations, a candidate had to be removed from the ballot, the parties typically have pretty, wide discretion to make that change. Either they have to bring back their delegates and revote, or some subset of an executive committee can pick a new nominee from anybody in the party. So that's easy if that happens before Election Day. If after the votes are cast, though, on Election Day, somebody were to die, would have to be removed from the ballot, it gets to be much more complicated, right? Because between Election Day and mid-December, that may be the popular vote, but the Electoral College hasn't actually cast their ballots yet. I think in this case, it would be very likely that if somebody died, the people who are committed to voting for the candidate who died or had to be removed from the ballot for other reasons would likely vote for whoever the VP candidate is as the president. So that's the second kind of scenario. And the more difficult scenario is what happens after the Electoral College casts their ballots. And so if somebody were to be elected and then again either die or otherwise removed, then on Inauguration Day, we would probably start the presidential succession process. So we wouldn't have a president to swear in. By the Presidential Succession Act of 1947, the vice president would be sworn in as the president. And then we would go through the process of picking a new vice president, which is all laid out.
Any final thought going back to kind of what everyone's talking about right now, which is the Trump verdict? A final thought as we head into the coming months ahead of the election.
Yeah, I think the one final thought I want to put in there is just kind of respect for our judicial system. And so agree with the decision, don't agree with the decision. But I think it's important to remember that the way our democracy works, it has rules. The rules were followed here. The case was followed. A jury of peers made a decision. And so I think it's encouraging, even kind of on a somber day for how we look at American democracy for sure.
Well, thank you so much to both of our guests today. You can read more of Graham Cates' reports from the Trump trial and beyond at cbsnews.com or follow him at x.com/Graham Cates, Cates with a K. And check out resources from the Bipartisan Policy Center like explainers, reports, and their ongoing projects at bipartisanpolicy.org. Of course, we'll continue to keep you updated on Trump's legal troubles, the election, and other news every weekday with our 10-minute news roundups. So join us again Monday for all the news you need to know. Until then, have a great weekend.